create and apply group policy objects. In this nugget, we'll be talking about creating and applying group policy objects. First of all, we'll take a look at what exactly is a group policy object, or what exactly is group policy. We'll see the kinds of things you can do with it, and it's a pretty broad scope. It's probably one of the most powerful tools you'll have in your administrative arsenal. We'll also take a look at the scope of management. This means, how can I determine to whom these policies are going to apply, to what computers they're going to apply, because you don't necessarily want it to apply to all users or computers all the time. You might want it to apply to only a narrower scope. We'll also just take a look at a simple way to create and link a group policy object and kind of turn it on, so to speak. And then we'll look at how you can actually work with the policy with various settings. You can enable a policy, disable a policy. You can block policy inheritance, and you can choose a no override item. And we'll take a look at what all of those different things mean. And then finally, we'll conclude here with group policy loopback settings, which are kind of a rare setting. We don't really use them very often, and they're kind of tricky, but they are important to know about for the exam objectives. Alright, now as we get started here talking about group policy, I gotta tell you, there is a lot about group policy in the exam objectives. They cover probably every major area of group policy, and group policy by itself is a huge topic. Also, it's kind of a dilemma for me because independent of CBT Nuggets, I teach a course that's a week-long course, well, a live course, a classroom course, with Jeremy Moskowitz on group policy. That's all we talk about for a whole week, group policy. So there's a huge amount of material, and yet we need to distill it down into what you need to know for exam objective purposes. So this is going to be a little bit of a challenge for me. I also say that to tell you this. I'm going to have a lot coming at you kind of fast here, and it just kind of has to be that way in this case in particular because there's way too much information to do it any other way. So, without any further delay then, let's move right into group policy, and first of all talk about what is group policy. Now, the main thing about group policy is it can control nearly every aspect of the user's experience. What they can see, what their wallpaper is if you want to, what their screensaver is if you want to control that. Just about everything the user can see and do. You can even install printers using group policy. So there's a whole plethora of different things that you can do. Also, it's very important in terms of configuring security. This is where we determine, for example, what their password length and complexity is, what their password history is, all those things. We may have looked at that at some point in the past year. I can also redirect folders. So, for example, when I save something in the Documents folder here, it's actually on a local hard drive right here. But that could get to be a problem because in a corporation, we generally want to centralize all of our data to a central file server or something like that. That way we can do centralized virus scans and backups. But we can redirect all that in a group policy to a central location so we don't have renegade data all over the place on people's individual computers. And then we can install software as well. And there are more elaborate and probably better solutions, such as using System Center Configuration Management, or you could use SMS if you have an older version of an automated system. But overall, you can still use group policy, and it does work, and it does its job well. Now, as it relates to group policy, let's first of all take a look at a couple of console items that we need to understand and distinguish right from the beginning. Number one, we have Active Directory users and computers here. When I start to configure policy, I have to make sure that my users, my computers, are all in the appropriate organizational unit. This is critical to making sure that policy does properly apply, because you can apply policy to maybe this organizational unit, but not this one. Okay, or maybe to the entire domain, including all of these child OUs that we see in here. But we want to block it from applying to these users right here. So you can do all of those things, but you have to understand some fundamentals of group policy first. Also, if you're used to working with an older version of Windows, like Windows 2000 or something like that, you may have used policies in the past directly from Active Directory users and computers, where you'd right-click on something and then you choose Properties, and then there used to be a Group Policy tab here. We don't do that anymore. Now that's all done through Group Policy Management. You can also download this and administer this from even an XP or a Vista machine, and you can also do this now, of course, with Windows Server 2008, and it's included with Windows Server 2008 when you add it as a feature. And then another thing to understand that's very important is look how this interface looks here, and then look how this interface looks down here. They look identical, but they're actually different locations. Sometimes it's easy to get these mixed up, So, for example, under Tucson users here, if I put the focus on it in Active Directory users and computers, that's where I work with the user objects or computer objects, as it may be. Down here, when I click on Tucson users, this is a group policy interface. So, just don't get those mixed up because you administer policies from down here and users and computers from up above. The other thing to understand is, and this is critical, you must understand something called the scope of management, or SOM. If you do not properly understand make my M a little bit better there. If you don't understand this very well, then you can apply a policy or try to apply a policy that actually goes nowhere. It kind of hits a dead end. Or, what's just as bad, you may configure a policy that is overscoped. In other words, it applies to too many OUs, too many users, too many computers, and it may lock certain things down that could, handcuff you and cause you problems in your organization. So let's take a look at this kind of from the smallest to the largest. First of all, it's not really a policy, but there's kind of the default settings that are hard-coded into the operating system. For example, here I could go to, I've made a remote desktop connection and logged on as Phoenix User 01, and this user can right-click on the desktop and choose Properties. And they can, of course, choose to go to a theme, for example, and they click on Theme, and they could choose, something else, Windows Classic or something like that. So certainly they have this availability. Nothing's locked out. I could click OK right now and go to that theme if I want to. The other thing that could happen, though, is you could create a local policy, and I'll just go to gpedit.msc. That is the tool that you'll use. It's a local console that you will use to create local policies, and you do have to have administrative privilege to be able to make changes to that. And then another thing that's very important to understand is, look how similar these interfaces look. Here I'm in Active Directory users and computers. Here I'm down in the policies. They look exactly the same, but they're different. Here I selected on users. I can see the accounts. Here I selected on Tucson users, and I see group policy items. Well, there's nothing there yet, but I would see that. Now, there's also another thing that's critical to understand, and that is scope of management, or SOM. Okay? With scope of management, we have kind of from the smallest to the largest as we go down this list, the way that policies apply. And it's not really smallest to largest, it's most general to most specific, I guess is a better way to say it. First of all, there's default settings. This is not really a policy at all, it's just whatever the operating system is already hard-coded to do. So, for example, here if I were to go to this Vista client right here and right-click on the desktop and choose Personalize, notice that I can go to the theme item, and if I want to, I can change the themes through the tab that we see right here and choose something else from the drop-down list. Okay? However, I also have something called a local policy. With a local policy, this only is configured on a single computer, and it only applies to that one computer. I can't apply it, set the setting up once, and have it apply automatically to more than one computer there. Let me show you how that might work. Here, let me just minimize this. I could go to gpedit.msc, gpedit.msc. And that's the command that you will use with administrative privilege to be able to manage local policies. So I'm going to right-click to choose Run as Administrator because I'm just logged on as Phoenix User 01 right now, which is an unprivileged account. And as I enter in the proper credentials to run gpedit, what we'll see happen here is that I can then get kind of some nodes that open up that I can use to control things. Now, in general settings, we will probably most frequently work with administrative templates for the computer configuration or the user configuration. Now, with this local setting here, if I go under administrative templates and I want to configure something relating to the control panel, which would be the display settings, and the ability to prohibit the themes here. So I could remove the theme option. So I can just double click on this item and choose enabled and click OK, and now I've enabled that. Now, it's a little bit difficult to understand sometimes, because at first glance you might look at this and say, okay, he enabled the themes. No, that's not what I did. I enabled the ability to remove the themes. And then some of these others might say disable. So if I had changed that to disable remove theme option, what would that be? That'd be kind of a double negative, right? Disable and remove. That would mean that I would turn themes back on again. Okay? So you just have to read them carefully. As long as you do that, normally you can keep it straight. Now the other thing I might want to do here right now is, I just disabled the themes, but if I go back to my personalization, look at this. I click on theme, and now it has told me that it's prohibited from the display settings in the control panel. So that's because of that group policy or that a local policy setting that we just configured. If I change this again and go back to not configured, which was the default setting, that basically says don't change it from the default. Okay. Then I click OK. Then we'll see that if we go back to theme, it may or may not actually work right now. Okay, look, it still doesn't work. Why is that? Well, you sometimes have to update policy, and you'll do that using a utility called gpupdate. Okay, and this is something that you can run without being an administrative privilege. You can also run gpupdate. What this will do is it will check the versions of the policy, and if the version number has incremented, then it will apply those changes. If it has not incremented, but you want to forcibly apply it anyway, you can do a gpupdate /force. Now, just out of habit, I usually do that anyway. I don't know why. A part of that's because there used to be a bug in Service Pack 1 under XP where you would have to always do the force, and then I kind of got into the habit of it a while back, so I still do it. Doesn't hurt anything either way. And now that I've run gpupdate, let's go back to the theme here and see if I can now access the theme, and it should appear here after I've applied the update. I ran gpupdate, and there it is. Okay, so now let's take a look at a few other things here as well. These two items for applying a policy, the default is just always there. The local item is very narrow in scope. It only applies to one machine. Things that relate to Active Directory and corporate-wide types of settings will be all of these other things that we'll do starting from the site. Now, even though the site is a very broad scope, it'll apply to anybody regardless of their domain membership in your forest when they use their computer in your site, for example. And a site policy is normally only going to be used for network types of settings, such as configuring a proxy server for anybody that's in your site, so that they use your own local proxy instead of going across the WAN to use the proxy server in their home network or something. You can also use it for other network settings such as IPsec. That might be another example. So that if I have a classified division within my company, and whenever I have visitors from my company from other cities coming into my network, I want to make sure that they only use IPsec. Well, I could do that as well. These are just examples of things you could do. Otherwise, we don't normally use site policies for things that are kind of interface settings or preferential settings, or giving or taking away the ability to change their wallpaper and stuff like that. More likely, we're going to be using, or more frequently, we're going to be using domain policies. This would then apply to anybody within my domain. Now, before I move on, let's talk a little bit more about the site and the domain policies so that you can see where they're configured. Here, for a domain policy, if I wanted to set something up for a domain-wide level, I'd right-click on this nuggetlab.com item, and I would choose Create a GPO in this domain, and link it here. If I wanted to do it on a site, then I would expand my sites out down here. Okay, and you can't really see it right away, so what you need to do is to right-click on it and choose Show Sites. I don't know why they do that here. Active Directory sites and services, it would have immediately showed up. Here we have to choose Show Sites, and we pick whichever sites that we want to appear in this interface. Then we would do the same. Then we do something similar to that. We would choose Link an existing GPO. Notice that there's no Create and Link. There's only Link. And I think the reason why Microsoft has done that, among other reasons, is because they don't want people to be careless about creating policies on a site-wide basis. Just carelessly, because the scope is so large, you could really cripple something or hurt yourself if you accidentally applied a policy to an entire site. Well, what would you do then? How would you link an existing GPO there? Well, there would have to be an existing GPO already created. Now, when you create group policy objects, this is how it's done. And one way to do this is to do what I showed you earlier, where I can just right-click on a given domain or an OU or something like that. Here, I'll just right-click on the domain, create a GPO in this domain, link it here. Okay. Or I could go to a given OU and say, do the same thing. Create a GPO in this domain and link it here. Okay. Either way, and let me just create one right quick, and I'm not even going to title this. I'll just click OK. Either way, what happens is it does create a GPO, and this is where it actually creates it. It creates it in the group policy objects. But notice that it also appears up here. Notice that there's also a visual difference between these two, however. This one has kind of a shortcut icon on it. This is really kind of a shortcut for group policy objects, if you will. And we say that this is just linked. This group policy object here is linked to the Phoenix users. Okay. In fact, if I were to delete this link right here, I'd right-click and choose Delete. Are you sure? Okay. But look, the policy itself still actually exists down here. And then if I wanted to link that to my sites down here, I could right-click there, choose Link an Existing GPO, choose New Group Policy Object, and now I've got it linked down here as well. And then notice that if I take this group This only applies really to that one user. So if I log off as Phoenix user 01, next time I'm going to log on as a Tucson user. Let's say Tucson user 01, and that user should not have the ability to use themes, because this policy, notice where it's linked, only applies to the Phoenix users OU. Everybody else gets the order of inheritance that's flowing down from the top here in the domain, and it includes the remove theme. So that'll apply to my Tucson users right here. Also, another thing to look at while I'm waiting for that computer to log off is that when I go to edit a policy, notice that it has, again, a user and a computer configuration. Since the policy that I configured was under administrative templates, control panel, display, desktop themes, since all that's under user configuration, I have to make sure that it's linked to an organizational unit where there are actual user accounts. So, for example, if I were to link that same policy, the allow themes policy, to the Phoenix computers, it would have done nothing because there are no user accounts in this. Okay. In fact, I could do it right now if I wanted to. Remove themes or allow themes, either one. Drag it up here. You sure you want to do it? Yes. I basically did nothing just now because since there are no users in the Phoenix computers OU, this is basically an ineffective policy, and I might as well just delete it here. So then, here I've logged on as, let me check it. I think I logged in. Tucson user 01. Okay, so I logged on as Tucson user 01. They try to personalize this and go to the themes item, but guess what? There isn't even a themes link anymore. Now, why does it not appear here? And in other places it did, even after we prohibited it. If the user is logged on at the time a policy applies, such as through a GP update, then what happens is that the interface item may still actually be available, but they can't do anything with it. So in other words, when they click on it, it still gives them a message saying that the administrator has prohibited it. Here, if we log on, though, and apply the policies fresh, it may take away that interface item altogether. So to quick review this, the remove themes item initially applied to everybody, including my Phoenix users all the way down through, and it still applies to my Tucson users down here. Okay. However, I put a conflicting policy. This one said enable remove themes. This one said disable remove themes. So it no longer applies only to that one narrow scope, only that one OU. The Tucson users still receive in their inheritance this original remove themes item, and so of course they don't get the themes. And this whole concept, by the way, of the scope of management, the term scope of management or order of inheritance does not actually appear on the exam objectives, but they may refer to it something more like hierarchy or group policy processing priority, those types of things. There's a couple of different terms like that they use instead. The real technical term that should be used, though, is actually scope of management. Now let's take a look at something else here. Maybe my Tucson users, they're a real creative bunch. Maybe this is my graphic artists and the people that do all my marketing and that come up with, poster designs and all this, and they're really creative and they want to have themes back just so that they can spread their creative wings. So what they do is someone from the Tucson users OU, they take me to lunch. They say, hey, I'm really missing those themes, and I'm buying you an expensive lunch over here at the Red Robin, and gee, I'm hoping you can give us those themes back. Any way you can do that? Well, if I'm subject to a bribe, and I might actually be, then what would happen here is I could give them the ability to use the themes a couple of different ways. Number one, I could just do the same thing here that the Phoenix users had. If I have the privilege for it, I can right-click here, create a link of GPO in this domain, and I could give the allow themes item and create a new one, kind of recreate the wheel. Otherwise, if I already know that this item exists, I could just click and drag right there. Okay, are you sure? Okay. Now, anybody in the Tucson users OU will also be able to have the themes back. Okay, so let me get rid of that, and we'll start another way. Another thing that I could do, I could right-click on the Tucson users OU, and I could choose block inheritance. Notice that it puts a blue kind of exclamation point circle on here. That's just a visual clue that we're blocking any policies that would normally have flowed down to us. Now there's some exceptions to that. The default domain policy has certain security settings that always apply, even if you block inheritance. But the remove themes group policy object now will no longer apply. I might have dozens of other policies on the domain level or a higher level OU level that will now no longer apply to me. This could actually be too prohibitive because, yeah, now I've given them the ability to use themes again, but I might have also had some policy at the domain level or a higher level OU like on Tucson or Arizona that maybe distributed software that they needed. Well, now they can't get their software. So you got to be a little bit careful about that. block inheritance blocks everything except for, again, select security settings on the default domain policy. So now let's go back over here and run another GP update and see if it's taken effect. B update. Okay. Now remember, we were not able to use themes just a few moments ago. If I go back into the personalize item, though, after the policy updates, we should be able to see the themes again because we've blocked policy inheritance. And so, sure enough, there's themes, and it comes right back. Okay. Now, another thing that could happen there, though, is maybe, maybe my boss says, "What in the world are you doing? You're not supposed to allow people to have themes. This policy should flow all the way down through, and I don't like the fact that you blocked inheritance." So this person could go back in here and deselect my block inheritance item. But what will I do? At the next free lunch I get, I'm going to go right back in here, and again, I'm going to block inheritance again. So it's kind of a ping-pong match going back and forth. If I have if we have done something like delegated administration, and this is something that we saw early on in our series here, where you can right-click on an OU, and you can delegate permission. So I can right-click here and choose Delegate Control. And then in the wizard, if I chose to just allow an administrator to have a narrow scope of authority right on this OU, for example, then what I could do is, if I have a higher level of authority, or my boss does, they could go up here and they could go to this Remove Themes item that they insist that I get, no matter what. Doesn't matter if I've blocked inheritance or not. Then they can right-click on this and they can choose Enforced. Okay, notice there's now a padlock little symbol on that. And now that will blast on down through, even if we've chosen to block inheritance. So then to demonstrate that, we're moving back over here where Tucson user 01 is logged on. If we go to Personalize now, again, we don't see the Themes tab there. However, this does also cause another problem. Notice that this, again, is now enforced. What does that do to this policy right here that says Allow Themes? Well, guess what? It blasts down through that as well. So now, if you decide to enforce a policy, it may be too overwhelming, and it may apply to places you don't want it to. Now, I can't override that anymore. By use of creating my own policy down here, this one will still blast on through. And let's take a look at that. Here I've just logged on again as Phoenix User 01. And now when we go to Personalize, again, I don't have the Themes tab, even though I've got this policy here that's supposed to allow it. Why not? Why isn't it not working? Because of this padlock for the enforced item blasting its way down through. So what else could I do with this? Well, since now effectively this link and this whole policy is not doing me any good, let me just delete that one. And remember, that's also going to delete the link from up here. But I could also do something else with this Remove Themes item. You see, right now it's set to on the security filtering over here on the right-hand side. In fact, I should probably explain this whole scope item. This tells me where it's linked to. Right now it's linked to the entire domain. If I link it to something else as well, that'd be kind of redundant in our case. But if I also linked it to Phoenix users or wherever else, it would also show me that location here as well. So let me go ahead and delete that now. So that's what that's going to tell us there, is when we take a look at the Remove Themes item. Also down here, there's the security filtering. This tells me who it's applying to, and that is all authenticated users. This would also include administrators, for example, because we are also authenticated users. If I want to be more specific about this, I could do that by simply selecting authenticated users, removing them, like this, and then adding in only, given user accounts, for example. So, for example, if I put in only Phoenix, or rather Tucson, user 02, and I'll check the name to make sure I type that in right. Okay. Now it's only going to apply to that one user. I've got it linked to the domain, and it's enforced, but it will only apply to that one user. Let's test it out. We'll log on as Tucson user 01 and Phoenix user 01, and we'll see now that with security filtering, which is another important exam objective, it only applies to the user here. Now, what you'll more likely see will be a specific security group that you'll use here as well. To demonstrate that, here I've gone and logged on as Phoenix user 01, and if I run a GP update again, then when we go into this, I should be able to right-click on the desktop, choose Personalize, and see the Themes tab, because it's now been set up to only apply to a specific single user account. So I click on that, and sure enough, now I have the theme back. However, if I log back off, and I log back on as that one user, the Tucson user 02 account, then what we should see happening there is it will only apply to that one account. And so then here we see that I have logged on as Tucson user 02, no themes link or tab, as I always sometimes say, but now it's a link, I guess. And so it's not there anymore. So the policy does apply as we expected. It does apply to the entire domain, but really, because it's on this wide scope and it's enforced, but in this case, now it only actually applies to a single user, because we see in the security filtering, that's the only user that it applies to. Again, the default security filtering would have been to all authenticated users. Now let me remove this and go back to the way it was. I'll add back in authenticated users. Okay, so now I've got our authenticated users. Now the reason why I did that is because I want to show you another way of narrowing the scope. Maybe I want this to apply to everybody throughout the entire organization. And let me just reset some things. So I'll unblock inheritance and I'll remove this enforced item. And this is kind of a more conventional flow. Oh, by the way, that brings up another topic just briefly. If you find yourself blocking inheritance in a lot of places and then overriding by choosing enforced in a lot of different places, then it's very possible that your OU structure does not flow well, and you may need to rearrange the OU structure that you have, because blocking inheritance or enforcing should rarely, if ever, be used in a good order of inheritance flow. Okay, so if you have to do that a lot, something's not right. Okay, now we've got this going on. Again, we have the remove themes item. It's still linked to the domain, including the Phoenix users. But now maybe I found out that a few of the Phoenix users here should get it, and a few of them shouldn't. Let's say that the Phoenix user 01 through 05 is my sales staff, and they should have that themes item. 6 through 9 are not part of my sales staff. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new group here. I'll call it Phoenix Sales, okay, and I'll populate that with those members that I just told you about. So members, add Phoenix users, and I will select the proper ones, which is going to work better if you type properly. Okay, so I'm going to do Phoenix user 01 through 05. Okay, see what I did there? Added those into the membership. Okay, and now once I've done that, I want to go back to the policy, and I want to not apply the policy to the Phoenix Sales Security Group. How am I going to do that? Well, I'll go back down to my Remove Themes. Notice that there's no way to not apply it here. I can only expressly apply it to specific users or groups down here. So I'm going to go to Delegation here, and this is going to be another way of working with it. I'll choose Advanced this time, and then you'll see kind of a conventional looking security item right here. The thing here is the authenticated users is going to have the read and apply group policy permissions. You see those? Okay, read and apply group policy permissions. That's why it takes effect, because of both those permissions. So, if I don't want my Phoenix users, my Phoenix Sales Security Group to apply this, then I'll just go up in here and Phoenix, Sales Security Group, and they also have the read permission, okay, but they do not have the apply group policy. However, since they are still a member of authenticated users, this would really not change anything. They would still get the remove themes policy. So the way for me to override that in this case would be to deny apply group policy to anyone in the Phoenix Sales OU, or security group, excuse me. So, summarize that again. Okay, let's go back up here. Authenticated users, read, and apply group policy. That's why they get it. I want to make an exception for Phoenix Sales. So yeah, they still have read. That's just the default, and I could clear that too if I wanted to. But the big thing here is I deny the apply group policy. Deny always overrides and wins everything. That's what this message is telling us here, in fact. So now I should be able to log on as any of the users, Phoenix user 01 through 5, and I should not have the remove themes restriction. So now here I'm currently logging on as one of these other users, Phoenix user 05. This is their first logon. When I right-click on here and choose Personalized, I should be able to see the Themes tab. So I choose Personalize. Sure enough, there's the themes. I keep saying tab, but it's the link. And now I'm able to do that. If I log off and log on as one of the other Phoenix user accounts, like Phoenix user 06, then I will have the Themes tab taken back away from me again. Okay? So again, the reason for that was because on the Remove Themes delegation item here, the Phoenix Sales Security Group does not have the apply group policy permission. In fact, it's set to deny. So now then here, let me close this up. I've logged back on as, who have I logged on as? Phoenix user 06. Person is not a member of that security group that we applied the deny permission to. So this person should not have the themes tab, and indeed they don't. So this is working as we expected it to work. Now most of the settings that I've shown you so far have related to user configuration. Here I've created another policy, and if I right click on it and choose edit, I'll show you what this one does. Basically the title says it all. It turns off the Windows sidebar, and I'll go into the administrative templates here on the computer configuration side. And you don't need to memorize what I'm showing you here for the sidebar. That's not going to be specifically necessarily on the exam. I'm just showing you that there are also computer side settings here, that's all. So now I'm going to go down here to the Windows sidebar, and I'm going to say turn off the Windows sidebar. Notice that I have enabled that setting. So now, once I link it to an OU, they should no longer be able to use that sidebar. Now, let me show you something else here. I've logged on already as Phoenix user 01 right here. Okay, and having logged on as Phoenix user 01, I've got the sidebar. So how is this even possible? Well, let's minimize this and let me show you what I got. I did link that to the Phoenix Computers organizational unit. And if we check the location in the Phoenix Computers OU, yep, there's my computer account. So why do I still see the sidebar? Well, you can temporarily link enable or unlink enable, if you want to use it that way, a specific group policy object that's linked to an OU. So right now, I cleared the link enabled. Okay, now if I click it, you'll notice that this kind of changes color. It's kind of more solid now. So it's now link enabled. Okay, let me emphasize it again. I'll turn it back off. So I'll click here, which would clear that checkbox. Now you see it's kind of dimmed out. That's the way it was. That's why the Windows sidebar appeared. Now when I link enable this again, and go back over here, if I restart this computer or GP update it, then we will see that this sidebar will then go away. And some of the settings also are a little unpredictable in terms of if I GP update it now, will it go away immediately? Or do I have to wait until, I'll go force this, or do I have to wait until a restart occurs? Most of them, especially as it relates to administrative templates, should take place immediately, but with this particular one, it may actually still appear. And I think that's exactly what it's going to do here. So let's just go ahead and restart this one. And by the way, here's a quick tip for you. If you're in a remote desktop session, notice that I was not able to restart from the start menu. If I could press Control-Alt-End on the keyboard, then I can restart from this little item down here. So I'll restart that. When it comes back up, we'll see if we have the sidebar. Alright, so now I've re-logged on as the same user. It doesn't really matter which user I log on as, because computer side settings will affect all users who log on. I could log on as an enterprise admin right now, and I still won't be able to use the Windows sidebar. You don't see it over to the right, and if I try to launch it from the start menu, can't do it because, again, that's been managed by the administrator and locked down by group policy. Now we need to talk here about loopback processing. In order to show you that, let me be clear on something else first, and that is how policies normally will apply. Here's my computer, okay? My PC, I'll call it. And this PC, when it starts up on the network, it has to apply any policies that are linked to it through the site, through the domain, through the OU, and so forth. And so let's say I have a policy at the domain level. Say I'll call this D1. There's one policy. Then I have another policy at the domain level, and that would be D2. So I have a total of 2 policies on the domain level, and then wherever this OU is, wherever the computer's OU is located, maybe I have an OU policy 1 and an OU policy 2. Now, if each one of these have only one setting, and they're all unique, in other words, none of them conflict with one another, then I'll have a total of, let's say, 4 policies, okay, that will apply to the computer. And that's just the normal way that policies work. That's fine. Then I'll also have the user. When the user sees the logon screen, they enter in their username and a password. And so then they may also have multiple policies. Maybe they've got a policy on the domain level, and they also have a policy on another policy on the domain level, and another one on their own OU. Okay, so there's OU1, and they have another policy maybe on another level there in their OU infrastructure. So there's OU2. Maybe they also have totally a unique 4 policies that apply. So between the computer we have 4 policies, the user we have 4 policies, for a total of 8 policies. Now the important thing to see here is not how many policies they have. These are just examples. They might have a total of only 2 policies. They might have a total of 24 policies. It doesn't matter. Just note that the PC starts up and receives its policies, however many there are. The user, they log on and they receive their policies, however many there are. I just chose 4 in this case. But in loopback processing, it's a little bit different than what we see here. Let's go ahead and take a look. Now with loopback processing, what happens here is you have two different modes that you can use. You can have merge mode, and you can have replace mode. Let me explain the difference. With merge mode settings, the computer will start up, and as usual, it applies its computer side policies just like I showed you here. Nothing unusual whatsoever. Okay. Then you have the user log on, and then it applies the user side policy settings just like I showed you here. Again, nothing unusual has taken place. However, then what happens is we apply the computer's user side policy settings. Well, you might say to yourself, how is that possible, James? Because a computer is not a user. I apply computer configuration settings, and those apply to the computer. And I apply user configuration settings, and those apply to the user. So how can I have user configuration settings that apply to a computer? Well, that's what loopback processing is. It kind of makes the impossible happen. You see, what happens now is I'll configure another computer policy here. Let me just call it another, OU3 for example. And this one will have user settings in it. Okay? Normally I would take a user policy and link it to an OU where my user accounts exist. This time I'm taking a policy with user configuration settings and I'm linking it to where my PC exists, or my computer exists. And now my computer thinks that it's a user. And anything that would normally apply to a user, it will apply to the computer. The net effect of this is, since this is going to be read last, see, what the order that takes place is all of these are read first, all of these are read second, and then in loopback processing, any user settings that apply to the computer, like I'm showing you here, apply third in loopback processing mode. They apply last. Okay? Since they apply last, they overrule any other settings. So, if I had certain policies down here for my user, maybe this is an administrative high-privileged user, where it would loosen up things, it would give them certain privileges that other users didn't have. But this setting here restricted it again. Since it's read last, it overrides, and whoever logs on, even if it's this administrator account, they will be in a restricted setting. Now, when do you use this kind of thing? Well, you might use it in something like a web farm or something where you don't want administrators to go in where you have the situation that you've got too many cooks in the kitchen, and one administrator sets something up one way and another administrator sets it up another way, and then you don't have any consistency, and it's really tough to chase down the different configurations that you have on those systems. Well, if you use loopback policy processing, then all administrators have exactly the same interface and capabilities regardless. So again, you could use something like this in, like a web farm. Another good example would be in a terminal services configuration where you have a lot of terminal services. You might want that kind of an interface to always be consistent as well. Now, just to quickly review, we apply all of our computer side policies, all of our user side policies, and then we apply the user side policies for the computer. And the net effect of that is whatever was in this setting, everybody who logs on will have to receive regardless of your level of privilege. Now, it could be that I have 4 unique policies here, and the policy that appears in this last policy is unique and does not conflict with any of these. Then I would have a total of 5 policies that apply. Or the policy setting that's configured in this might conflict with, let's say, whatever this policy was. If that's the case, then it'll overrule this policy setting, and I will have to be forced to receive that setting. Okay, so just another example of how that works. Another place, by the way, where you might use this, and besides web and terminal services, is you could also use this in maybe a kiosk. Okay, I might have in my lobby of my company a visitor's kiosk so that users from my branch offices, when they come to my office to visit, they can walk up to that kiosk and check their email and run an application or two or something like that. But I wouldn't want a domain admin from a different branch office to come in and just suddenly take liberties with that kiosk and say, hey, I think they really ought to change the interface to work like this or to do this. Well, with a kiosk computer, I could forcibly make even administrators have the same interface settings by putting in highly restrictive policies in this last group policy object. So that's just another example of how you can make all of this work. Now, with replace mode, what happens here is the same thing, except that it entirely skips this middle step. So, it'll apply the computer side settings, And then it totally skips applying the user-side settings and goes right to the computer's user-side settings. So if we take a look at it this way, what happens is it applies all this as usual, and then I don't care who you are, you could be an enterprise admin, we totally skip all of your policies that would have applied to you. And we go directly to the user configuration settings that apply to the computer in loopback processing mode. And in this case, replace mode, again, totally skips the user's settings. This is just another alternative method for making this work. The reason why you might want to use a method like this is if you were to say, even administrators, normally in merge mode, let me clear that up. In merge mode, we might still want to allow the administrators to have a couple of settings that apply through these policies, but they just have this one or two settings here that they got to be restricted by. If we were to go to replace mode, we would say, I don't care who you are, you get nothing. You get these computer settings and whatever I tell you here, and that's it. And that would be replace mode loopback policy processing. Okay, so to demonstrate loopback policy processing, I've already created and linked policy right here. Let's go ahead and take a look at it. As I edit this, the user side setting that I configured, that I want everybody to get, even if you're an administrator, would be under policies, administrative templates, and you can choose any of these. I'm just choosing this one as an example. And on desktop, I said, let's just take away the recycle bin from the desktop. That might be a good example of a kiosk machine, for example, where you don't want any icons on the desktop. That's very often the case, because you don't want people to open them up and then to drag something out of the recycle bin or to restore it. So I wanted that. And then in order to turn on loopback processing, I also have to have that in here. It doesn't have to be in the same policy. I'm just putting it in the same policy for convenience sake for right now. But you could put it in a different one if you want, but it would be under Administrative Templates, System, and then I would go to Group Policy here. Then once I've gone here, you would have to go to User Group Policy Loopback Processing Mode. Okay, then you enable this. And I set mine to merge, but I also described replace for you. And that's just the one we're going to use right now, is the merge mode. So then I close this up, and then once I restart my computer there, then we should see that no matter who I log on as, I'm not going to be able to get the recycle bin. And so here I've logged on as Phoenix User 01, and you can see that, of course, I have no recycle bin on the desktop. Now I'm going to log on as the trainer account, which is a totally different account, a high-level privileged account, and we'll see that we still don't have a recycle bin on the desktop because of the loopback policy processing that I've enforced. And so you can see here that I have logged on as the trainer account. Once again, no recycle bin on the desktop. In this nugget, we took a look at creating and applying group policy objects. We first of all took a look at what group policy is, and remember, this is a far-reaching capability that you have to configure and manage virtually every aspect of the user's environment, as well as various security settings and so forth, and we'll look more at security as we go in future nuggets here. And then we took a look also at the scope of management. Notice again, you can apply this to the entire domain or an entire site, as well as a local computer, a single local computer, or a narrow scope of maybe users, maybe group membership, or a single OU. So you can look at the scope of management to determine how far that policy is going to reach. And then we just looked at creating and linking a group policy object. Very simple way to do it. And then we looked at all these settings as well. Remember, to enable a policy just means that you're going to make true whatever the policy says it's supposed to do. You can also disable that policy, and you can also block policy inheritance, and as well as choose a no override setting. Remember, these two settings here, you don't want to use those too terribly often, because that could mean that you have a bad OU design. You want the policies to flow very naturally through the group policy scope of management. And then we finally took a look at the group policy loopback setting, which is what you can configure so that you can force settings to apply no matter who is logged onto the computer, even administrators. Well, I hope this has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.